Wheel of Genre, the show for readers whose favorite part of eating a peach is the pit. Each week we spin the wheel and land on a new genre. Spies, mysteries, horror, romance, SF, it's all on the shelf. And right now we are reading fantasy. This time, Robert E. Howard's The Scarlet Citadel. I'm Zach, and this week I am loving the story, but I am also really interested in this menagerie of beasts and anecdotes and just this world that is built here.
I'm Bob, and I'm struggling with the way that you said pit still. So, um, one thing, one thing I should say too. In our recent Fritz Leiber episode, we kept saying Lieber, and I knew we should be saying Leiber, and I just forgot. So I'm sorry. We
Okay,
just
well,
really Lieber, Leiber. Anyway, I'm really interested in the return of the king aspect. Again, a comparison with Tolkien, but I think what a fun. I don't usually like adventure, but I think Howard. No one writes adventure like Howard. It's
mm.
incredible, and I've always not liked the genre, and I think this is just awesome.
Well,
Howard's great.
I'll say that this is the second Tolkien comparison you've made in as many episodes between Robert E. Howard and Tolkien.
Sorry.
And I think that this is the kind of comparison that Howard fans would be nodding and shaking their head enthusiastically, and Tolkien fans would be like, "No, no." It's for some reason it strikes me that like
Hmm.
Robert E. Howard doesn't get the kind of glowing affections of the average Tolkien fan that maybe you seem to think that he deserves. So I'd love it if you could flesh out this picture for me a little bit.
I think there's a. I want to talk about a few reasons why I think that there's probably a bias, but I think this is fun because it's Return of the King, but in 20 pages as opposed to 450. I love Return of the King, but I know a lot of people knock it for being too long.
Hmm.
I think that maybe there's a bias against Howard because Tolkien's a professor, one, so he is at the top of culture. Whereas Howard dies at 30. He was working as a soda jerk. He lives in the middle of nowhere, Texas, where no one respects him in his town. No one cares at all what he's doing, and he's publishing in Weird Tales, which is, I think, a great place for stories. But lots of people didn't like Weird Tales at the time, and Tolkien goes directly to, oh God, I don't even, some big publisher.
Well, he's an Oxford Don, which
He's an Oxford
is a
Don. You don't really
totally
get higher
different
than that.
lifestyle. Yeah.
Yeah. I think that there is something to it. We talked earlier when we read I think the essay is just called The Hyborian Age, right?
Mm-hmm.
The Howard essay. So we
Yep.
talked about that being culture and humanity kind of going up and down in kind of a roller coaster where you evolve, devolve, evolve, devolve. It's not really working toward anything. Whereas Tolkien, even though earlier we said maybe it's a little not negative, but things are getting worse as you move away from the golden age. However, it's also kind of that like Christian test of giving people choice. And even though lots of bad things happen, you can choose and improve. So even though the magic has to go away in Tolkien, humans are making the right decision and they're expelling evil because they're doing the right thing. I think there's a very clear attachment to Lord of the Rings because it's a long epic fantasy, whereas Howard is one short story each time, and it's not working towards anything. Eventually, Conan becomes king, but he doesn't really, who cares? He's like, I just would rather go fight people again. Whereas Lord of the Rings is like, okay, evil came in and then good conquered, and we could all go forward as humanity. And that's a huge success. And that's the epic scale, but also a great win for goodness, not just a conclusion of someone at the top. It is goodness has reigned supreme, and it should in that world. And I think another thing that people like about it is, I guess, the morality. Again, goodness, but Conan is in this story. In our next story, we see that he's killing a few people who probably didn't really deserve to die, but there's something not amoral, but something. He is a barbarian, and there's not the Christian morality attached to this. So I think that is another thing. It has to be kind of not niche, but almost a cult following. Conan has a cult following, whereas Lord of the Rings is the dominant culture. I think it's a Christian morality that is the dominant culture, and then Conan is a different kind of ancient wish fulfillment and is more cult following, I think.
Mm. Well, I guess uh, the real example that highlights everything for me is the fact that in Lord of the Rings, a lot of people identify the primary protagonist as Frodo Baggins. And in
Mm.
Conan the Barbarian, the primary protagonist is Conan the
Conan the
Barbarian.
Barbarian.
Yeah. And those two characters couldn't be anything, they couldn't be any further apart.
Mm.
But before we go any further, I do have things I want to respond to you with, but I think that maybe we should swing back around and talk about what happened in this story, because there was quite a
Oh,
bit,
yeah.
quite a bit happened in here. I'll give a rundown. You fill in the blanks as I go. So Conan rides off to go help, someone he views as an ally, but he's betrayed, he's captured, and he's sent to the pit. Inside the pit, he sees a variety of horrors, including, oh my gosh, so much. A frog-like creature, a ghostly presence, holes in the wall where it's just drums banging in the air, like he just hears faraway drums, things like that. But he meets a wizard, escapes. He rides a big bird back to his homeland, where there's internal usurpers coming up in his kingdom and causing disorder and havoc. He kills them. And then forces are on their way to conquer his city, and he kills them, and then he kills the evil wizard. And then at the end, he finishes off by saying how much he would enjoy a flagon of wine. Is there anything I missed, Bob?
That is one of the best endings to a story I've ever read. It says, "Give me a clean sword and a clean foe to flesh it in. Damnation! What would I not give for a flagon of wine?" Oh my God. So cool.
Yeah. Incredible.
Yeah, I think it's incredible. I think that you did a good summary. I think I want to talk about the pit a lot because, as we know, Conan and Lovecraft shared lots and lots of letters. And wow, did the pit remind me of Lovecraft, where we don't get super clear descriptions of these creatures. There is that weird frog-like creature that also seems to be not really solid, and also it screams like a person.
Yeah.
Very disturbing. Again,
Well, and he heard it thinking it was like a child's laughter or a girl's laughter,
right,
or something like that. And then the sound slowly morphs as he gets closer and closer to like a gurgling frog-like sound. It really, really scary. I love that.
Yeah, I thought it was very disturbing. It reminds me of the elves being turned into orcs and being turned into these monstrosities. In the Hyborian age, in the essay, he talks a lot about of devolution and then evolving back into humanity. I wonder if I think Sotha is the name of the sorcerer here that's causing so many problems and that kind of created this weird underground layer, the pit. And I think he might have a hand in creating these terrible things. It seems like he's taking advantage of that succession of humanity and he's experimenting.
I think that part of what makes it so scary is that we don't know where they come from. I think it's implied that Sotha has a hand in it. I think at one point, people are described as being like insects under, a scientist's, manipulation. A very modern simile for sure, no doubt about it, but at the same time, like, I think it's a very interesting thing because it tells you, or what it implies is that if some of these aren't creations, they're out there in the wild already. He's kind of dredged them up. Maybe like a cabinet of curiosities might be a good way of thinking about it. Just like a room where strange things are kept. Well, I think one of my favorite ones was the flower that was wrapping itself around, that was trapping Peleus the wizard,
That was scary.
with leaves that were, bright red, and gosh, it moves like an animal, but it's a plant. It's constricting him and seemingly, pacifying him. But what they said, there's always these great turns of phrases, but they're saying the roots go down essentially into hell, and the
Mm.
roots are some darker cosmic entity of which this plant thing is merely like the outward manifestation. Something about the way he writes these just really sets your imagination off, and that's what's so good about him.
Oh, I agree. When we read the Tower and the Elephant, no, the Elephant, the Tower of the Elephant, sorry. When we read that too, there are just descriptions of, where the rope comes from or where this monster came from. And I feel like now you could take that one little concept and turn it into a full novella, a
Hmm.
full short story. And here it's just one paragraph to describe, yeah, I got this rope, but there's a huge backstory to it. That Yothka plant is so cool. And I think you're right. It is an elder god that goes way beyond anything else that's going on. There's always something underneath, just like in Lovecraft, that is too terrifying. And even Conan, when he sees it, or no, when he sees that frog like creature, I think, he says that he has so much fear that if he were not a barbarian, he would assume that he was insane. That he assumes that
Yeah.
he would be insane. It's a lot like Lovecraft, where if you see these things, your mind can't take it and you break down.
I think it's also good characterization in that well, okay, so like if you think of Conan the Barbarian just as like a cultural icon, you think of someone like Fearless who physically cannot feel fear. Just but he's not like a Terminator. He's not like a killing machine. What we see here is this kind of interiority of Conan that makes him much more relatable as a character. These kind of eldritch beings, these kind of dark, demons from long ago, actually do fill him with quite a bit of fear. And it's not that he just hacks his way through them. Well, he does literally hack his way through them, but it's not just like one man with a sword killing gods. It's him kind of scraping through, scraping by. He's filled with fear, and he manages to use his brain just as much as his brawn.
Yeah, just like, I mean, he doesn't kill that plant because he knows that he shouldn't kill things that go beyond his understanding. And the Peleus, the magician, the sorcerer, says, yeah, if you did, you would be unleashing all sorts of things that you couldn't fight.
He says,
Right.
"Why didn't you pull it out by its root?" And he says, "I long ago learned not to touch things that I don't understand, like with my bare skin or something along those lines." And yeah, it just shows that he's not just a brute.
Yeah. He's not just a brute, he is very smart. So, speaking of Conan being not just a brute, but also being intelligent, he can get out of, it seems like, any situation and he can master any situation. He reminded me a lot, and again, kind of non Christian because his morality is questionable. He reminds me a lot of Odysseus, or
Mm.
Thor, even, maybe more Thor. But does he remind you of these characters? Odysseus, who can, he's cunning, he's a little bit manipulative, and he's also not very honest. But as long as the gods are on his side, he knows that he's doing the right thing, even if it is lying. But Conan, I don't think he would lie. I don't know. Do you feel there's a comparison between Conan and some of these old epic heroes?
Well, I think he kind of really gets the glory moments of both Odysseus and Achilles, in the sense that,
Hmm. Oh yeah.
in Homer, you get this concept called like the Aristeia, the hero's finest moment, which would be like basically in like the movies when the heroic figure goes out in the battlefield and it's just them against an army and they hack and slash their way through it and everything's in slow motion and you hear the screams and the blood and that's the Aristeia basically. And I feel like what you get with Conan is a kind of an Aristeia of Achilles as he's on the battlefield, just constant. Just his constant finest moments are anytime he steps on the battlefield. But when he's not on the battlefield, you get really the best of Odysseus. Odysseus, who's not really a fighter, but more of a kind of trickster, scoundrel, rogue, lying, cheating, thieving son of a bee. Uh, and Conan, and Conan really is that. I mean, he's a thief and a plunderer, but he's also a king. He's
Hmm.
a he's a wandering hooded figure who's a stranger and a drifter, but he's also, uh, the regent of a land. He's he manages to fit in every archetype you could want from any kind of ancient Greek hero and just kind of place them into one character. And God bless him
Hmm.
for it.
God bless him for it. I wonder, yeah, are there so many inside of him that he has contradictions? I guess I haven't seen one yet, but it does seem almost impossible because he's kind of like all Aristea all the time, but then he's also all drink all the time, and he's also all party all the time. Yeah, he's larger than life for sure.
And maybe that's what makes the Conan story so good and so remarkable, is that you have a character that feels larger than life. You know, maybe you could spend your whole life training to be a good soldier and you'd be as good of a soldier as Conan, but would you be as good of a thief? You know what I mean? Or as good of a, whatever. Like there's so many aspects that are almost like James Bond-esque and how good he is as a character. But then on top of that, like the world is just overflowing with ideas and images, really strong images and really evocative anecdotes that just make it feel bursting at the seams with life. And actually, I did want to highlight an example of Robert E. Howard's panoramic style. There's this one moment where Conan is captured and he's being taken away and he's having this moment of reflection. And it says, in swift moving scenes, the pageant of his life passed fleetingly before his mental eye, a panorama wherein moved shadowy figures which were himself in many guises and conditions. A skin-clad barbarian, a mercenary swordsman in horned helmet and scale-mail corselet, a corsair in dragon-prowed galley that trailed a crimson wake of blood and pillage along southern coasts, a captain of hosts in burnished steel, on a rearing black charger, a king on a golden throne with the lion banner flowing above, and throngs of gay-hued courtiers and ladies on their knees. This is like Walt Whitman, but in a fantasy universe.
Yeah, that's true. He's great. I always think, when will it get tedious? Because if he is so powerful all the time, I always compare things to Dragon Ball Z, but if you have a character like that who just wins, has struggles but always wins, is it going to get old? And I think it is. It comes down to the extremely high quality and thrilling quality of the writing that Howard never seems to, he doesn't seem to drop. These get picked up by, what is his name, Sprague. The people who keep, L and some other guy, they keep writing these Conan stories, and they're just taking drafts, I guess, of Howard's and then turning them into new stories, or just also taking a little tiny chunk and turning them into brand new stories. But the writing quality is immeasurably worse. I mean, good for him for doing it, but you can't write like Howard. There aren't. This is very rare, I think, to be able to write this well. He can do world. He can describe setting. He can describe characters. He can describe action. He's just extremely good.
Yeah, I mean, the only person I feel like who comes close to Robert E. Howard's writing is Dan Simmons. I feel like those two are my favorite genre fiction prose stylists by a long shot, actually. Mm-hmm. And the similarity between them is really that they're not afraid to just overstuff a sentence. They're not afraid of the semicolon. They're not afraid of running on and on and on with all of these nouns and descriptions and things going on. It's gorgeous to read.
I got a bone to pick. I really like what you said, but I was reading the introduction to the biography about him by Mark Finn called Blood and Thunder, but the introduction is by someone named Joe Lansdale, and he has a great point. He says, look, Howard needs to be more remembered in Texas. He should be like the writer of Texas, and we need to have we need to celebrate him more, consider him a real writer. But then he goes, certainly he didn't have the style of a Hemingway or a Fitzgerald. And I don't know if I agree with that. I'm gonna put my foot down and say Howard is better than Fitzgerald or Hemingway. I know that's probably not true.
I was thinking it.
Mad about that. But I think Howard
I was certainly thinking it.
Howard is really, really, really good. I think he's great. Joe Lansdale goes on to say that it's maybe because he has pulp tendencies. But I'm thinking, why do we have such a bias against pulp? Or, well, obviously, I guess it's pulp, but why have a bias against different genres when there's someone this good writing in the genre? You shouldn't trash it for a silly reason.
Well, okay, I'll play devil's advocate in the sense that I think that I mean what okay, so I think that what the claim I'm willing to make is that Howard is a better stylist than Fitzgerald. That's the claim I'm willing to make. But I think that the issue is that Fitzgerald quite consciously attempts to write about the world as he sees it, or the people that he meets in this world. And I get the sense that with Howard, like the overlap between his life and the people he knows and the his own personal experience, the overlap between those things and these stories is two circles. There's no Venn diagram. It's just two circles. They're totally separate. So I think that what a lot of people want when they talk about like literature, capital L, serious literature, is something that is a reflection of real life that other people can look at that reflection and then feel like their own life is being read into it. And I guess under that rubric, if we ask, does Howard do that? Can we look at Howard and be like, oh, wow, this is really doing something for my life? For me, the answer might be no. But I think Howard's doing other things. And I think that Howard exists as a kind of writing for writing's sake that is beautiful in its own way, yet existing in its own universe.
But then what about things like Homer? I mean, that seems to be writing for its own sake, not for him at the time, maybe, because everyone probably believed, at least in some ways, in the gods that he's writing about and in the heroes, potentially. But why do we continue to read that except for our connection to history? None of that is really happening. It's all legend.
Well, I mean, I guess I would say maybe we read Homer as an artifact at this point. We read Homer for a different reason than we would read Fitzgerald, not because we want to, you know, get a reflection of life at the time, or in our time, but life as it was a long time ago. But, even as I say that, I don't think people read Fitzgerald because they want an illumination of life today. They read Fitzgerald because they want to know what it was like to be alive in the 1940s, when he's writing his major works. Even Fitzgerald has kind of slipped into the kind of historical document track. You know what I mean? If people want to know what life feels like and get a reflection of their life in the internet age, they read a contemporary novelist. But the thing about Howard is, Howard won't tell you what it was like to be a Greek in 600 BC. He won't tell you what it was like to be an American in 1940, and he certainly won't tell you what it's like to be an American in 2024.
Well, if that's the case, I think we should just read Herodotus. I think we read Homer because it's extremely good. It's the best. Homer and Shakespeare, nothing else compares to that. So it's not just because it gives us a glimpse into those times, especially because Shakespeare's talking about all sorts of different times. That could get confusing if we're just trying to get one feeling of the past. I think there's a high quality that we can't lose, and we have to read these things. If we don't read them, we're missing out. I think that Howard deserves a much higher place than he gets. And people like, I'm sure he's a nice guy, Jonathan Franzen, it's okay. He wrote books, and I guess they're about life. But I think Howard, there's something special that we're not taking seriously in his books. And even though all the stuff he's writing about doesn't exist, I really loved what Tolkien had to say about the subcreation, about that being honoring what goes on, what is reality, even though it looks not like reality at all. Something about it takes his imagination that is a reflection of the real world, like a mirror, takes that seriously and does a beautiful job portraying it. I think we need to give him more credit.
So here's where I'll agree with you on what specific points. I think when we talk about Homer and what you're talking about, the things we like about Homer, it's like the similes. It's not the moments where you can learn something about the ancient city of Troy, for example. It's the descriptions of like the rosy fingered dawn, or like a simile that goes on for 5 lines where it's like a hawk glinting in its eye as it captures a fish and it rips its guts out with its talons. So Achilles'
That's
sword ripped the man's gut. Like those things are like literature for literature's sake, and it's the same with Shakespeare. Like, we don't read Shakespeare to know what it's like to be two I was gonna say teenage lovers, but really one teenage lover and one 30-year-old man in Italy, Romeo and Juliet. We read him because of the soliloquies that kind of reveal something about the innate human condition, and those elements of, I guess you could say, capital L literature that kind of exist beyond the context but are kind of just the pure art. I feel like what Howard is doing is giving us these heightened dramatic moments where it's just that. No, we've used the cracker and cheese metaphor before. Howard's given us all cheese, no cracker.
And the cracker's connecting us to the real world, not in
Yes.
this case the
Yes,
plot, because they
yes,
are very
yeah.
heavy plots.
Yeah. I don't know.
Maybe it's because I think you're right. There's something that isn't moving about the Howard stories. As like I am totally trapped inside of the stories when I'm reading them because they absorb me so much and they are so thrilling. I think one thing too is you have to look at the words on the page. You can listen to the audiobook, but you should also look at the word. The construction of sentences is impeccable.
Howard's one of those writers where I just feel so thankful that we are really at the start of our journey with him. I mean, we read our first Howard story way back at the start of this podcast. I think it was like episode 4. And now this is like 130 something, and we're finally reading the second Howard story. Actually, we did read The Sea Curse at one point, but we're on our second Conan story.
Right.
Yeah, The Sea Curse. That was a good one. That being said, I feel a great sense of optimism knowing that we just have many more Robert E. Howard stories ahead of us.
I do too. Let's move on to the Elephant in the Tower, the Tower of the Elephant soon. But I think one thing I've already said it way too many times, but I want to look at in that story is the first time we read Conan the Barbarian, when we read Phoenix on the Sword, my expectation was, oh, this is going to be crap. Here is the pulpiest of the pulp. Here is some garbage that we're going to read. That was what I thought. And I think that is such a shame that there are lots of people like me who look at Conan and think, oh, it's probably crap. Because this is incredible writing. And I think that's a shame. Mm-hmm. So I'm very excited. I agree 100%. I would love to read more. I just want to read it all at this point.
All right. Well, giddy up. Talk to you later, Bob.
Talk to you later, Zach.